This is the Automotive Talent Show, hosted by Cameron Cresswell, bringing you conversations with people shaping the automotive industry across Australia, New Zealand and beyond. Each episode explores career journeys, business stories and real insights into the market, the challenges, the shifts and what's happening on the ground right now. This is Automotive Talent. Let's begin.
My guest today is Mike Costello. Mike has had a cracking career, not only as a journo, editor, broadcaster, he is now the public face, the Australian public face of one of the largest automotive businesses on the planet. In this episode, we cover the Aussie market, where it's actually at the moment, what's happening with Chinese brands and EVs, especially when it comes to not only the retail, but getting into the auction block side of things, how AI is changing everything that we do, and also what it's like going from someone who asks the hard questions to work for someone that he's asked the hard questions of. All that and more in this episode. Stick around. All right, the Mike Costello story. So appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with me today, mate. I've really been looking forward to this, and I think your perspective naturally is you come from a different perspective, which I think people are going to get a lot of insights out of. But for those of you who don't know the Mike Costello story, you've got a very interesting background. So clearly you're an automotive professional. Where does it all begin for you, Mike?
Well, I suppose you could probably say it begins in 1989 when I was 2 years old and said car as my first word. But it's one of those things. My father was involved in the automotive industry in Western Australia I worked for Nissan, sort of your classic, started as a technician and ended up in the corner office kind of operator. So I grew up around cars, was always obsessed from day one. I think it was sort of foreordained I was going to end up in the auto space. But specifically in terms of role, I mean, I was a fledgling political journalist. Did a couple of internships at The Age and Crikey, and wrote a thesis on the use of social media in politics before it was a thing, and that was really my trajectory. And I think, like a lot of budding journos, I sort of just initially just needed a job. And there was a job at Go Auto, the sort of well-known industry title, going as sort of a entry-level cadet. And I thought, you know what, I love cars. I never really thought about it. I mean, I read Wheels as a kid. I like, any car now. I read all the publications, but it never really occurred to me that it would be a sort of a career. And then sort of one thing led to another, and relatively within a shortish period of time, ended up being fortunate enough to be managing editor of that publication and learning the ropes and cutting my teeth in a very fortunate way, sort of the old school journo approach, which perhaps has gone by the wayside a bit today. Learning from my first sub editor was a former chief sub of the Herald Sun, kind of the real old school operators, and climbing sort of through that business, and moving on to some other publications over the journey, being involved with quite a few, and sort of forming a close to 15-year career as a motoring journo before moving on to other things, which I'm sure we'll touch on. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I think what strikes me is about that background is that you get to witness the industry in all of its forms, don't you? Like there's more to it than just the OEM side or the retail side or the design side. There's many different disciplines within our industry that makes it diverse. And I often say the industry is like a hallway that you walk into and has so many doors in it. You can open whichever one you want.
Well, the other way to look at it is never annoy anybody, because you never know when you'll be working with them or for them or under them, or they'll be working for you, or some combination thereof. It's musical chairs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But funny enough, isn't it? The family connection in a way kind of made it an option, and that's the same for many people in this industry as well, including myself. So it's our DNA kind of gets altered, I think, a little bit, that we're given, and the rest they say is history.
100%.
Yeah. So and many people would obviously understand that about yourself, and but in your later years, naturally you've jumped out of the journo side and in the in-house side and working for a little-known company called Costello Automotive, which, is a young up-and-comer.
Yes.
And represents some of the good big brands of the world. So, how did that all come about?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, I mean, my journey as a car journo was fantastic. I joined Car Advice when it was fledgling, and we sort of scaled that from a small business to a large one that then sold into Channel 9 and moved on and sort of did the whole startup thing again with Car Expert, being part of the foundation team there, and did a stint as a freelancer, ABC and Wheels and a few other bits and pieces, and I think 15 years of that lifestyle really has its way with you, living out of a suitcase. I mean, I know all the junkets and stuff sound super glamorous, and you're seeing a very strange view of the world where you're dealing with some of the highest profile people in automotive, and you're going in
Yes.
boardrooms and getting wined and dined and driving cars and all this fun stuff. And it is, but I think everybody eventually wants a change in life. And I was really fortunate that I was sort of at a bit of an impasse, having freelanced for a while, noticing that the sort of stuff that I like to do, the industry, the heavy hitting, the stuff that takes legwork, it really wasn't the focus for a lot of titles in the way that it used to be. And I sort of was wondering, is there more to this world? And the sort of age-old pathway that journos tend to do is they go and run public relations for a car brand or something. And that was always a consideration. But my current CEO, Stephen Lester, who many who of your listeners probably know of, who was the managing director of Nissan in Australia, who's now head of Cox in Australia and Mannheim. He reached out on LinkedIn and just sort of said, "Hey, we think we need someone to do some PR work, but also some sort of corporate thought leadership." It's a bit of a wanky sort of term, but
Yep.
sort of drive the conversation around the company. Try to tell stories, try to inform our clients, try to inform the market, leverage and find intermediate opportunities. And I've got to be honest with you, it was an interesting, intriguing kind of thing to think about, and kind of came into the role as a bit of a blank slate, not knowing exactly what it was going to be and having to learn about this enormous business, which in Australia is, focused on a little less than it is in America. So it was
Yeah.
really just a quiet conversation that got that happening, and then we've sort of just rolled with it, and it's become sort of something perhaps a little bit unexpected, the nature of the role and where it's taken us. But it's been a really brilliant change. I think when you're doing the car journalism thing, you're seeing a very thin sliver of the automotive world. You're being presented with a
Yes.
very, very well packaged version of reality, and everybody's trying to make sure that you see the best of everything. And I've really enjoyed the fact that, I mean, we work with so many thousands of customers, to be able to see under the bonnet and to see how the fleet space works and the dealer space works and the after sales and government and banking, and to sort of see behind the scenes, and to get a much more rounder understanding of the automotive ecosystem has been incredibly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the science behind it, lifting the bonnet and having a look. That's naturally the big learning,
Mm.
because, yeah, it's all, we all see the shiny things in our world. They're we all see the end result, or we all see the trophy cabinet or the make and target or the budget, but the work that goes into it is where that's the journey, not the destination, isn't it? So yeah, it gives you that more
I have
understanding.
a pretty peculiar situation where my current boss, or my boss's boss, I should say, the CEO of the company, is somebody who our first relationship was me kind of trying to skewer him in a boardroom as a journalist and trying to push him. And so it's a strange power dynamic. And I think the thing that
Does he ever remind you of
oh,
that?
loves to, loves to. He's a legend. But yes, the dynamic
Yeah.
is definitely different to that, of course. But look, I really
Yeah.
think you do see a very limited version of things, and I think sometimes I've known journalists who fall into this trap of kind of thinking, "Gee, everybody's so nice and great, and everybody loves me, and look how good I am." And sometimes I think you forget that you're there because of your role, and you're there because of the influence and the soapbox and the microphone that you have. But if you leave that
Yes.
behind, you have to understand that the world is going to treat you differently, and it's going to be a good thing and going to be a challenging thing, and you have to adjust.
Yeah.
But it also, I
Yeah.
think, the having an ability to communicate in a corporate environment, I tell a lot of journalists I still see that don't underestimate your skill set. It's actually very broad and applicable to a lot of different things, because the skills that you
Yeah.
develop in terms of presenting, in terms of compiling information, asking the right questions, having an ability and affinity to sort of talk to people is really valuable, no matter what job you're
Absolutely, yeah. That relationship management piece and the ability to connect, isn't it?
in. Mm,
No matter what you do, it's an important skill set, and to be fair, it's also something that I think until you hang your boots up or microphone up or whatever it is that you use, you work on. It's an evolution, isn't it?
absolutely, it never ends. Never ends. You're always growing, and if
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
if you're treading water, then you're doing it wrong, right? I think the point of the professional journey is to continually challenge yourself and try to be a little uncomfortable within reason. Um,
yeah,
Otherwise, you're not really growing.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And you picked a pretty good business to join when it comes to looking at the science side of things. They've got some knowledge and some information and some data for you to have a look at to really get your head around the science side of the business. And
Mhm.
well, I think roughly Cox employs roughly 26,000 people or something globally,
Yeah,
something
in the
like that.
automotive space, it's up over 30,000. And then we've got the parent company that
Yeah,
owns farms and, TV networks and all sorts of things. But the automotive division, headquartered out of the US, operates on 5 continents. Around the world, it's got a lot of different business units. Things like dealer software, service department, X Time software, Kelly Blue Book, obviously
yeah,
valuations, or classified sites, even battery refurbishment and recycling, as a space it's moving into now. In Australia, we mostly focus on the Mannheim auction business. That's our real bread and butter here, and that's obviously a fascinating business. And I think wholesale auctions. It's not necessarily a sexy subject, and from a PR perspective, it's sometimes a hard thing to really make people interested in. But when you actually think about it, if you're remarketing secondhand assets for governments, for OEMs, for dealers, for banks, um, myriad big fleets, leasing firms, you name it, you're engaging with pretty much the entire ecosystem in one way or another. And you're offering a really broad amount of services to those different organizations. And one thing that can really set you apart is having great data, having great insight, being able to add a little bit of extra value beyond just the
yeah.
actual sort of task that you're set. And so I think we try to kind of look at it through that lens. And of course, having access to the global parent is just a brilliant thing to be able to tap into. And I try as often as I can to talk to my compadres over there in the States and in the UK in particular, see what they're doing, they see what we're doing, and together, I think we all kind of help each other out.
Yeah, very similar. Like I know, obviously, even though different continents, I think there's learnings that we take from the US naturally, but our market's probably more aligned with Europe and the UK, isn't it, when it comes to brand saturation and where our market is kind of evolved to. But yeah, it's I think there's learnings to be taken from developed and even developing markets as well. Fair to say. What was the biggest sort of light bulb or learning moment for you in joining the Cox business? Like, what surprised you the most, would you say?
That's a really good question. Look, I think probably just what surprised me, I think, was understanding that different stakeholders in the industry have such different expectations, and understanding that for sort of what I thought was a rounded understanding of the automotive world, car maker launches product, dealer sells it, end of story. And then seeing
Yes.
firsthand that there is this entire knock on and not just secondhand vehicles, but then, we have a salvage business where we sell damaged cars for insurers, for example. And so getting a real sense of just the scale of the ecosystem, the number of businesses operating in that space, the number of stakeholders involved in that space, learning just how deep, and the iceberg analogy is really quite perfect, right? Where you sort of, I
Yep.
always saw the thin sliver at the top and I was missing everything else below it. But I think also part of the other one is learning from a personal point of view that I think when you're a journalist, you spend a lot of your life, and especially if you're a younger, I mean, I'm not young anymore, I'm middle aged, but if you're sort of 40 or under, the whole time you've been in journalism, it's been a little doom and gloomy because you've seen the revenue dry up, you've seen constant, innovation changing what it means to do the job. It's become a much harder, more demanding job. And you're constantly on tenterhooks wondering if you sort of have a future. And then to get into this corporate environment that can be quite forbidding, and you're sitting in boardrooms and big offices and you're dealing with really important, influential, smart people, realizing that the skills that you have honed in that role are actually, you can hold your own. And they're really useful and they're really relevant. And you're
Yeah.
not just, I think initially it was almost like, what's this journo doing floating around here? And it became there's actually useful transferable skills that can make me quite effective in this role. That was a really light bulb moment for me. And just understanding the business. I mean, it took me quite a long time, to be honest with you, to truly get my head around what this business is. It's such a big beast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not an easy thing to do, but I think the old adage was, I reckon I learned more in my first 6 months in this role than the previous 5 years of being a journo.
Yeah. Accelerated learning program, I think, just from what you get access to, isn't it? The different areas. And I think, to be fair, I think it takes someone 12 months to learn their role truly, to understand what they're doing and their place in it, like their place in the organization.
I think so, to truly
to build the
understand it.
relationships. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, at least that 12 months. And we're recording this, and it's we're nearly at the end of May. As of next week, everyone goes into full last week of the month panic mode. So, we're coming into what's traditionally our busiest time of the year as an industry when it comes to sales. We've had a very interesting, since February pretty much, we've had a very interesting year so far. Obviously there was a massive swing to EV away from traditional petrol and diesel. And, that's actually kind of swung back the other way a little bit now from all of the intelligence that I'm learning from talking to my people and clients. What's Cox's take on the current market? What's the insights there?
Look, one of the things when I'm talking to my overseas colleagues, and you mentioned before about taking lessons from elsewhere, is actually feeding back and saying Australia is not a huge market in terms of volume. 1.2 million sales is actually not very many in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah,
But
2% of the world, I think, something like that.
But what it is perhaps the most interesting import market on the planet, bar none.
Yes.
We have more than 20 Chinese brands that have come out of nowhere. In fact, in aggregate over the past 10 years, there's been 22 or 23 more brands added. There were 44 brands 10 years ago. There are 66 today. And we are really at the kind of tip of the spear of this sort of wave of Chinese products that we're seeing. So that's sort of one of the fascinating things that I often feed back to my colleagues at other sort of Cox Automotive business units to look at that sort of stuff. I mean, what we're seeing this year is, a quarter of all vehicles sold this year are Chinese cars in Australia, and that's not Chinese made, that's Chinese brands. That is an enormous spike. We are seeing disproportionately the Japanese brands are the ones that are being impacted by that the most. The Mitsubishis, Nissans, Toyotas of the world are the ones that are being impacted. We're seeing this colossal change in buyer sentiment around what it means to be loyal to a brand and whether you're open to trying something else. And these concepts around brand loyalty are changing. Obviously, we're seeing, particularly in the last month or two, with oil prices and other things happening around the world that are impacting general costs and people looking to save money, has been the spike in electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. EV sales are up to nearly 1 in 5 sales in April, about 13% for the year. That's just battery electric alone. And then we've overlain all this with the vehicle efficiency standards that the government's put into place, which are driving really strong supply of EVs. It's a supply side lever that encourages manufacturers to send more EVs our way. And until recently, the demand side of things outside of the novated lease space wasn't very strong, frankly, but that has changed a lot in recent times. And, you're seeing all these colossal changes. And then when you think about the fact that we're in a fairly oversupplied environment, which was sort of the norm before COVID and has become the norm again now that we're out of it, you've got a perfect storm of hard economic times, soft business confidence, stagflation on the horizon, unemployment figures going up, interest rates going up, more competitors in the market, lots of inventory on grass. That's a buyer's market if ever I heard of one. And you've only got to look at the OEM websites, and all of them have got, thriving EOFY discount sections on their sites. Every single main brand is doing, whether it's cheap finance, whether it's a deposit contribution, whether it's free accessories or, just a straight up discount.
$5,000 in fuel.
Whatever it is. And so, that is the real thing that is happening. And that's obviously got knock-on effects on dealer profits and margins. And it's also going to sort the wheat from the chaff in terms of which of these myriad new brands that have joined the market do actually make the cut. And moreover, will some of the older brands continue to remain? I mean, you wouldn't have thought Holden would go away, but it did. Chrysler, Dodge, Opel, plenty have gone. Citroen. I don't think 66 brands for a 1.2 million market is sustainable forever. So I think that there's the prospect of that happening too. Different retail models are obviously a part of this too, although the agency conversation has definitely simmered down now that we're back in a buyer's market again. But the overall sentiment, I think, is that we'll probably see, we saw record sales in 24, record sales again in 25. The market's down a few percent this year and will probably remain that way. And even if sales are somehow as high as they were last year, the actual margins definitely won't be. I saw some figures the other day. The average discount at dealer level at the moment is just under 10% per car, which is the highest it's been since pre-COVID, I believe. So
that's right.
It's one thing to sell a car. It's another one to actually make money on it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Someone actually made a good point to me the other day, talking about brands and sustainability, and their view was that back in the day when we had a choice, if we went to being a left-hand drive market versus a right-hand drive market, our outcome would be different,
Mhm.
especially with the North American centric brands that have, predominantly in the world, it's a left-hand drive market,
Yep.
right? So that's where the true volume is. Like, it might mean something different when you don't have to retool a production line to make an Australian or a right-hand version of a particular vehicle. It was an interesting thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think EVs make it easier because there's less mechanical stuff going on. It's all, especially with the
Yeah,
advent of things like steering by wire, that shouldn't be too challenging. But then also you look at Australia, and I always tell my American colleagues that American market is about 15 times the size of ours, and yet they've got fewer brands than we do. We've got a lot more
yep,
models on sale than they do. And it's
yep,
actually interesting to me how many brands really want to make it here and really want to try here, because there are a lot of barriers to entry, not in terms of tariffs and subsidies, but tariffs and other forms of protectionism, but in terms of the steering wheel being on the wrong side of the road. And
yeah, yeah,
unless the vehicle is going to be popular in the UK and Japan and South Africa and a few other right-hand drive markets, it's very hard to actually sell it here. But we don't seem
yeah,
to be short on
absolutely.
choice, to be honest with you.
No, 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 no. We, once it gets over that cost of landing barrier, then it makes it very appealing
Mm.
for new brands to come, for sure.
And it's a learning market.
So
A
yeah,
lot of these Chinese brands, they see Australia as a great stepping stone. It's quite cost effective and quick to sort of gear up here because it is quite a small market. There's really only sort of 5 or 6 big cities where you've got to really put your focus behind. It's a mature, sophisticated market, really good people, really good IP. And so it's the ideal test bed for a lot of these companies that may have their eyes on bigger prizes, but they may see Australia as that kind of initial step. And so we're really at the tip of the spear in a lot of ways, and that just means more choice. And if we don't make things here anymore, there's really no reason to put up any barriers to entry. Frankly, it just wouldn't make sense.
yeah, yeah. Don't get started on taxes that were installed to support our local manufacturing. That's a whole lot of podcast topic, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously Cox is very much, obviously everyone knows Cox for Mannheim here in Oz, but it's a technology business
Hmm?
at its core, really, isn't it? In many ways, what's the most exciting piece of tech you've witnessed or seen from your time at Cox, and how do you reckon that'll be rolled out and add benefit out there in the greater landscape?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, I'm loving what our parent company is doing at the moment with its battery testing and its EV battery testing and rectification kind of projects that it's working on, VIN-specific stuff that's really exciting. A lot of the automated technologies we're seeing rolling into things like inspection tunnels at the moment, not replacing people, but helping them. And sometimes that's with AI, we say that and it's not real, but in this case, it really is, where, these
Yes,
sophisticated tunnels where you drive a car in and it takes these incredible images, and then you tick off what the damage is, and it's obviously very useful. But then also the integration of AI into dealer management software is really interesting. And I love the X time business is fantastic as well, because often I think fixed ops and service departments, they're not the sexy bit of the dealership, but they're definitely the engine room. They're definitely the breadwinner. And so to have technology that
yeah,
really helps them with their customer satisfaction and the ease of management, I think is really useful. And there's lots of great tech going into that too. You correctly say we really are a tech and big data business, particularly in the US, where we're just a megalith. But yeah, it's the most interesting time, and the sort of, it's almost impossible to keep track with all the different things that they're doing over there at the moment.
yes.
I could spend my
Yeah,
entire
but
job
it's
just
it's
doing it.
true though. Yeah, absolutely. It's true though. Like, the old adage is data is power, isn't it? When it comes to, like, that's the new commodity. But there's as absolute learnings. I remember hearing about something that Cox was doing in regards to helping dealerships with their websites and managing remarketing cars. Like, the data was to a point where they could literally predict when the customer would make an inquiry on a particular vehicle on a particular website because of the
Hmm.
buying behavior of the person. So,
Yeah,
that comes about through, having that massive data pool to be able to predict the future on, and
that's right.
even changing the price depending on that, like steering to the human and backing it up with science.
It's
It's the new world. It's the new
It's
world.
the difference between being reactive and being proactive, frankly, as a retailer in today's
Yeah.
context. If you're not using all the technologies at your disposal to understand your customers better, to talk to them better, to engage with them by any means necessary, And for example, the integration of stuff like Impel AI, I am not someone who thinks we should be automating every single product now. And we actually are quite a human focused business, and I really like that. But for example, the idea of having a chat bot that is the initial point of contact that kind of keeps the lead warm and vets the lead. And so that by the time it gets through to an actual person, we know that they're a serious, likely customer. I mean, I can see real use cases for all that. And as you say, harnessing big data to truly get your head around people, to really understand when they're going to buy, what they're going to buy, it actually is better for the customer because it doesn't waste their time. And it's much better for the dealer because they can, devote their finite resources to the things that are really going to help them. And so one of the fascinating things about Cox as a company is that it really is this whole ecosystem. It sits at this nexus point where it can sell you cars, it can provide a platform for you to buy new assets, but it can also power your business's back end and software and everything in between. And then even end of life stuff, which we work on too. So it's this incredible ecosystem, which I think is quite a unique beast, really.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And AI is two letters of the alphabet that a lot of people are naturally scared of. And look, I'm a bit of an embracer of technology rather than being pessimistic about its future. But in my experience, and this is obviously, I think in pretty much everything you touch these days, my feeling is that AI is only going to enhance the experience. It's only going to make an individual more productive generally. It's going to increase efficiencies and, make our lives better. Is it ever going to 100% replace an individual person in our world? I don't believe so. And that's the thing about like AI in dealer land and a lot of systems is that it's doing the jobs that humans don't like to do or generally aren't very good at anyway. The whole follow up, the analytical piece, making sure that things are getting done. And what's your viewpoint on the AI side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I've come around. I was naturally a little bit of a pessimist or a cynic early on because I had a lot of concerns around what are the social ramifications of this shift that we're seeing. If you have a significant number of people out of work, what does that mean for the economy, for the tax base, for social cohesion, for all these other bits and pieces? I tend to be more of a big picture thinker in that regard, but I have come around to the notion, having harnessed and used a lot more of it myself, that understanding that while there will be those who try to essentially outsource humanity to the cloud, um, used correctly and in the right way and focused on the right things, it's actually just a tool like anything else. And I think we will find that, and I do think that Cox Automotive's attitude is very much along those lines as well. All of our talk about
Yeah,
AI integration is always how it can help the person, not how it can replace the person. And a lot of
yeah,
services that we offer, they still rely on people. They're still physical assets. They're still, human beings that we're talking to here. And I think you've also got to be careful as any company talking about AI that, you can't forget that you're ultimately dealing with human beings here that are going to buy the stuff that
yeah,
you're selling. And so trying to
yeah,
just completely take the human out of everything is obviously a fool's errand. And there's this kind of frankly overhyping of the industry driven by the share market and by expectations. But it will settle down and simmer down like everything else, and we will realize that it's a very useful tool for productivity. But it's never going to be able to fill every single void. And I don't think that's a controversial opinion anymore. Like perhaps maybe it was.
no, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the educated and best hypothesis. I think because naturally, I think in essence, what it does essentially is frees people up to do the stuff that only the people can do. So
Mm,
it allows you to spend that extra time on a phone call. It allows you to spend that extra time talking to a customer. It allows you to fully focus on that meeting, and it takes notes for you. It does all of those kind of things. But
absolutely right. And,
when it comes,
nothing can crunch through spreadsheets or massive data sets or automate tedious programming or coding or any of these things that are frankly the task of a robot. And nobody enjoys doing them, and they're incredibly time intensive. I mean, it's just tailor made for all that stuff.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. How good's your crystal ball, Mike? How predicting the future? What do you reckon the industry is going to be like in 10 years from now? What's your view on
Yeah.
where we're headed?
It's fascinating, isn't it? I actually, to sort of step back, I sometimes compare 2016 to today and I look at just how much has changed. And Back then, passenger cars like I-30s and Corollas were half the market. Today, they're not even 10% of the market. Back then, there were no Chinese brands. Now they're 25. Things have changed this extraordinary amount. There's, 29 new brands have joined the market and 8 have left since then. And so sometimes 2016 feels like yesterday, but look how much has changed. It's almost unrecognizable. And Apple CarPlay didn't even
Yes.
exist then. And now that's like the bare minimum level of all technology. And so if we try to, cast forward, I think things won't change as much in some ways as expected. I don't think we're all going to be driving around in driverless rideshare vehicles without steering wheels by then. I think the task of actually improving infrastructure and getting people's confidence in the technology is much bigger than it's made out to be. So I don't think that's going to be here in 10 years. I think you'll see, obviously, EVs will be a significant proportion of the market by then. Will they be 100% by 2035? I don't think so, not in Australia. I think they'll be the majority of the market, but I don't think they'll be 100%. I think you'll find the Chinese brands will consolidate around a handful of really big players rather than having, 15 OEMs with 30 different sub brands. You'll probably see maybe 5 or 6 continuing, a bit like we've seen with Japan. I think you can probably say
Yep.
BYD, Geely, Great Wall, Chery, MG, maybe some of the others will struggle. Some will make it, some won't. I think you'll probably see fewer brands in market by then, whether it's 50 or 55 rather than 65. Will clearly be what happens. I think we're going to have a really big conversation around what in-vehicle data means, and people will start to ask questions around all of this stuff that my car knows about me. What is actually happening with
Yes.
that? I think it's going to become a
What a
really,
broadcast about me.
really big talking point.
Yes.
I think the cat's out of the bag with stuff like SUVs. I think that sort of body type will remain pretty popular. I feel like we've passed peak ute as a market. I think we'll see dual cab sales not come off a cliff, but I think they will slowly come down. It's also interesting for me to look at the fact that over the last 10 years, the population aged 18 to 80 is up about 3 million people, but the car market itself is only up by like a few percent. And so what we're seeing is the car park getting a lot older because new vehicle sales are not growing proportionate to population growth. So we'll probably see the park get older and older as well. And then the other
Yeah.
part of it is, what kind of secondary market around used cars, but also around repairing and the aftermarket are we going to see as the EV revolution takes hold? What's that going to look like? It's going to look quite different. So I think there are probably some sort of talking points that we can start to think about. And I think the old adage, it's not going to change as much as you think it'll change in some ways, and it will change a hell of a lot more in other ways than you think it will. And we
Yeah.
often get we have a lot of hype in some areas that's overblown, and then we often don't even think about areas that will revolutionize that we're maybe not thinking about as much as we ought to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think another growth point is really dealer experience. I think the
Yes.
dealer experience is going to be, it will look similar to what it is like today, but the enhancements will be around that customer experience in dealer land. There'd be a lot more automation,
Hmm.
and just that efficiency pickup. Like it's still really funny to me that in Australia you go to buy a new vehicle and it is a significant experience, isn't it? It takes hours, sometimes days, where in the US you can literally drive in and go, I want that one, and they drive away with it in 60 minutes time.
And in China, it would just be delivered to your house. Um,
Yeah.
I think generationally too, like I think you see with younger people, Gen Z in particular, it's a stereotype, but they'd much rather just order something on a phone and have it arrive. And frankly, we live in a time when the homogeneity of vehicles is so much greater. When I first started reviewing cars, you still got the occasional real shitbox of a car. They don't really
Yeah.
exist anymore. Like cars are so
No.
similar. And so things
Yeah.
like customer experience are going to be the absolute determiner of what makes a brand. It's not going to be the product so much because regulation and legislation essentially makes them all so similar in so many ways. So it's going to be that other stuff. The brand touch points, how do people feel engaging and dealing with you? They're going to be really what sets it apart. And then on the dealer subject, you've also got this looming thing where a significant proportion of dealers aren't making money at the moment. Dealers have always operated on quite lean margins, particularly at the front of house. And so that's going to lend itself to ongoing, I think, consolidation of ownership because the big
Yeah.
players like the
Absolutely.
Eagers of the world have got the sort of scale to share services to outcompete. So I think you will find that maybe the number of rooftops won't change much, but the actual number of organizations owning them might change. And then this
Yeah.
whole thing we talk about being omni-channel, where, we're very focused on that here at Manham and what we do, which is it's not about trying to just sell a car online, go to woe. There has to be a human aspect, but making it really seamless so that there's never any kind of the sort of flow from online to offline and back again is just as smooth and seamless as it can be, rather than having this stultified, stilted approach where you're sort of constantly stopping and starting. All of that, I think, will come into play a lot. And the retail space will change significantly as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're already kind of seeing it out there in dealer land, that automated, dedicated phone line for a customer to ring up to book their car in for a service, and it's AI on the other end, even though the customer doesn't know it's AI.
They wouldn't know.
So
That's right. That's right.
no,
Stuff like I think it's
it's
Auto Guru, or there's a few other organizations doing that sort of stuff where. And you know what?
yeah,
If the customer doesn't know and it's a good engagement, what's the problem? Like if it works, it works,
yep,
right? And I think, and again, there's a generational aspect to this. I think the expectations
yep,
of an older person from a different time will be a lot more challenging. But to younger
yep,
customers, they're not going to know anything else. It's just going to be the norm. Of course, you deal with a chatbot.
yep,
And the first time you deal with a
yep,
human is when you actually go into the dealership. And then, you're not going to be in dealerships as much because EVs have got longer service intervals if you service them at all. So your
yep,
relationship with the brand is going to change a heck of a lot too.
yep, absolutely. I don't know well, they predicted a little while ago that the cars actually would take themselves off for a service, but I don't know if we'll see that in our lifetime with the compliance orientation of our
I think
lovely
that's
little island
exactly what
here.
it is. I think the technology is, I mean, you look at what the Waymos and stuff are doing in the States in Cali and in geofenced ways, and the technology is like the LiDARs and radars and all that stuff, maybe not so
Yeah,
far
it's
away,
all
but
there. Yeah,
the infrastructure and then the legal side of it,
the regulation. Yeah,
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 that's the
yeah,
slow bit. And so people kind of look at a Waymo driving itself and go, great, I'll be able to summon myself a rideshare car, a robo car in a few years.
yeah. After a pub session.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
bit more to it
yeah,
than that, isn't there?
yeah, yeah. I think so. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, who knows? It's that might be something that we need to revisit in the podcast in 5 or 10 years' time, just to reference check ourselves and see
Well,
how
I wonder what
see
podcasts
how
will
our
look like.
predictions are
What
going.
will podcasts look like by then? Will it be holograms on desks talking to each other? Who knows? But I think you'll find that medium will change quite a bit too.
Well, I think as long as there's genuine people behind it, mate, I think that's the most important thing, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, is
It
it's
is.
all about. That's what it's all
And
about.
I was reminded of that this week. I was at the Fleet Management Association. I think they call it the Leadership Summit, but it's the fleet conference that everybody attends to every year in Sydney. And you've got
Yeah,
1,000 people that you're rubbing shoulders with, that you're shaking hands with, that you're drinking a beer with, that you're talking to in person. And that's this industry in a nutshell. It's relationships. It's who you know. Um, and you can add a veneer of technology to everything. But ultimately speaking, this is a relationship industry. And that's one thing that I really like about it. First of all, they're material, tangible, physical assets that we're talking about here. And they're not just soulless devices. People love their cars. People define themselves through their cars. They're a big deal. And then the industry that supports them, it is this incredibly broad, diverse, increasingly diverse, which is great, industry that is just brilliant. And you can lose yourself in this. You can work in this industry for decades and I don't think ever get bored of it. And there's a reason why nobody ever truly leaves automotive. I had one colleague, quite a senior one recently, go into an entirely different industry. And we were all amazed, like, no one leaves the car industry. What are you doing? It's that
yes,
kind of
you'll
place.
be back.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, yeah, they'll be back. They always do.
Yeah,
We always have there's always a magnet. There's a magnet attached that we, point in a general direction and it
100%.
gradually brings people back. But you're right. It's a relationship business. It's always been. And, I remember as a young fellow with my dad and my grandfather, it was always, you have a problem, you ring the guy that knew something about how to fix the problem. And, they turned up on your doorstep and next thing you know, it was done. So, yeah, it's about who you know, just as much as what you know.
100% right.
Yeah, very good. Well, on that note, mate, I really do appreciate you taking the time to have a good conversation with me today. Took a lot of good information out of it, and no doubt someone out there has learned a little bit more about the industry in general. So I appreciate you taking the time, Mike, and Thanks a lot, mate.
No, it was a real pleasure to be on, mate. It's really good to have a chat, and anytime, anytime. And I encourage,
Good,
by the
good.
way, if anybody has more questions, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to have a talk. I'm always glad to meet people. So yeah,
Absolutely, mate. Well, it's the name of your game, I suppose. I'll put your link in the description notes, so it makes it easier for someone to do that. But yeah, appreciate
amazing.
your time, Mike. Thanks very much.
Pleasure to be here.
Good on you, mate.
You've been listening to the Automotive Talent Show, where career stories, business journeys, and market insights come together from across the automotive industry. If you found value in this episode, follow the show and share it with someone in the industry. To learn more or connect with Cameron, search Automotive Talent on LinkedIn or visit automotivetalent.com.au. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.